also something on which general consensus has not been arrived at so far. There are people, large number of people who think that it is a very good thing because that will provide a certain benchmark against which we could judge our own educational system. On the other hand, there is widespread feeling that it will lead to elitist education, and only the better off people who can afford that kind of education will get the benefit of such universities, and the relatively economically poorer sections of society would be deprived of this, and they will be getting some kind of an education which is not up to the mark. Should we allow by allowing foreign universities, should we create that kind of a schism in the society on qualitative matters? The answer to this is that shutting out competition and excellence is not the answer for survival. Rather, competition is embedded in the very basic nature of nature itself. It is nature's inherent system to succeed by competing, survival of the fittest. So if you do not compete with others, if you do not match against the very best in the world, how do you survive? So there is a strong point of view that by exposing ourselves or by getting the benefit of foreign universities setting shop in India, our own education will receive the right kind of impetus to improve in quality and generally compete with the best in the world. I'm not making any statements on my own, but these are the two parallel systems of thought that are prevailing here. We have a bad example, I should say, in the area of health services in health sector, where privatization has opened up large opportunities and better health care, but at a phenomenal cost. Whereas the health sector in the public sector, health services in public sector, has not been able to catch up with what is available in the private sector. Therefore, health services as a whole has become prohibitively expensive, and government has not succeeded in acting as a leveler or as a countervailing force by which economic forces could be controlled even as quality, accessibility to quality services are provided. I think the very same fear prevails in the area of education and allowing foreign universities to come to India. At the same time, you cannot stop knowledge from traveling all over the world. India has been the center of learning in ancient times, and people from all over, students from all over Asia and even Middle Europe have come to India to get the benefit from our ancient universities like Takshashila and what is the other one? Nalanda and Takshashila. Now, exchange of information, exchange of knowledge, particularly in today's world, is unavoidable, and you cannot create excellence in a vacuum. Excellence is not born in a vacuum. Excellence is always born by interaction and exchange of ideas and attitudes. Therefore, there is definitely a case for allowing more and more foreign universities to India, even while taking care to see that it does not smother the educational system that we have created by ourselves. Although that system lacks a lot of things, and that this kind of competition and comparison should provide a platform for improving our systems and introspecting what is affecting our universities, what is ailing our universities. We are not inferior people, but our systems may be inferior. What can we do to achieve excellence in our own system? These are, I think, by shutting out the world, we are not going to improve. We will only degenerate and deteriorate from within. Therefore, we shall not shy away from competition, but we shall not die with competition. That's also important. I will not go further on this, except to one more word of caution, and that is, when we say that inviting foreign universities and collaborating with them is a good thing by way of quality upgradation, it also needs to be looked at whether the institutions from abroad, from outside India, who are coming to India are the very best, What is their motive? What is their motive? Are they the very best, or are they only marketing their university properly so that our children get lured into it? What is the kind of regulatory framework that India has today to ensure that only the best in the world comes here and provide the best education? India is not lacking in educational infrastructure and educational system. We have developed our own educational system. We may not be the very best in the world, but I'm sure there is a making. India is capable at least of creating the world quality education. Therefore, there is a need for a regulatory framework by which we are certain that only the better and best in the world come here and provide that kind of education to our children in India. So we should welcome, in a way, foreign universities in India, even as we sort of make our own homework in ensuring that it does not sort of wipe away whatever existing system we have. Rather, it should instill a kind of desire and inflame our passion to improve our education and imbibe the very best from the West or East or wherever it is from outside world. I think these are only rudimentary thoughts on this subject. I have only presented this so that the subsequent eminent speakers could get a kind of perspective in which we in India, and particularly in Kerala, view this subject of international campuses and other forms of educational collaboration. I'll conclude by saying that this does not, whatever I have said, does not preclude the necessity, the emergency or the urgent necessity for intellectual collaboration at all levels. That I think in India, there's only a great desire for intellectual collaboration. The only word of caution is about setting shops here and having offshore campuses here. So I think every scholar in India would be happy to more and more collaborate with outstanding scholars in other parts of the world, because globalization of knowledge is perhaps the most unavoidable wave that is sweeping the world today, and India cannot be out of that loop. With these few words, I will stop at this and invite Professor Brian Mercado, Professor of Science and College Rector of Yale NUS College, Singapore, for making his presentation. Thank you.
States, we tend to call universities places that offer graduate degrees and have more than one colleges. There are different faculties, as different places call them. So we are a Bachelor of Science and Arts granting institution. We are a joint effort between the National University of Singapore and Yale University. We are neither a branch campus of either. So we're not a branch campus of Yale, we're not a branch of NUS. However, we do rely on the resources of each of the universities to kind of make things a lot easier for us, frankly. Another thing I'd like to clarify a little bit is this term liberal arts. We actually batted around the idea a fair bit of calling it Yale NUS College a liberal arts and sciences college. As mentioned before, I am a professor of science. I do environmental science. Social sciences is also considered a science, so arguably we could be a liberal science and arts college. But these are a little bit of semantics, but as we start these discussions about how higher education looks in Asia and particularly in India, I think it's important to get these terms clear. We have a sort of mission statement that was close to haiku. I hope there's no experts in haiku here. But our mission statement is a community of learning founded by two great universities in Asia for the world. A community of learning founded by two great universities in Asia for the world. This actually has a lot of information in it I think is important as you guys consider how you're going to move forward with investing in higher education here in Kerala and in India more broadly. I'm sorry I got here late and I missed the conversation on MOOCs. This has certainly been extremely popular in the last few years and is growing staggeringly and offering education to all sorts of people that hadn't been had access to this education before. And I also wanted to comment briefly on the introductory remarks about elite education. Coming from a university like Yale University in the States, where within a few years tuition will be on the order of $60,000 US per year, 60,000 US a year, 55 now, about 55,000 now. That's no joke, and that really is sort of catering to an elite organization, elite audience. So I'd like to comment on that also as we go forward. To back up a step also, I'm glad that Murli invited me here. The work that we do outside of building new institutions has to do with disasters, and I think also my colleague Gunther might speak a little bit on this. But my research as a scientist is on looking at disasters, specifically tsunamis. And my first exposure to this was just a little bit south of here in 2005 when the tsunami hit Sri Lanka. I was part of a UN-based team that surveyed the damage from the tsunamis in Sri Lanka and also in Aceh province in Indonesia. And we also went to the Maldives and have been to several big disasters since then, and Murli is unfortunately familiar with all of these past events, including Haiti, tsunamis in the South Pacific and Java, lots of bad disasters. And it really does seem like these disasters are getting worse, despite increases in technology and construction practices. If that's the case, why does it seem like still more and more people are dying because of tropical cyclones and earthquakes and tsunamis, heat waves, cold snaps? And this is really a lot of the work that many of us are involved in doing this. And when you study these things, the first thing that really struck me of going to Sri Lanka was how incredibly complex these disasters are. I can tell you a quick story. I'm looking at the sisters who are in the audience here also. We stopped at this one beach. It was just outside of Hambantota, where the villagers were kind of laughing. There's an interesting spirit that evolves after disaster, but this starts off like a bad joke. In this one village, there was a mosque, a Hindu temple, and a Catholic church. And they were lined up along the beach, and the mosque, which was right on the beach, sustained very little damage, as did many of the mosques in Indonesia. And the Hindu temple had a channel that went right through it. Just, everything was perfectly intact on either side of the small channel, and the channel cut right through it, not quite destroying the temple, but causing a fair bit of damage. And the Catholic Church, which was furthest inland, maybe 200 meters inland, sustained very little damage. I'm sorry, no, it was completely destroyed. In this case, by either the earthquake or the tsunami, wasn't really sure. So we talked to 3 or 4 different people on the beach, and the first person we talked to happened to be a Muslim. And he said, "Oh yes, Allah protected our structure here. We've been very good Muslims here in this area, so in this case, Allah spared our institution." And we went a little further down the beach, and we talked to somebody else, and I think it was a Hindu person, and they said, "Yes, well, we've been doing good here, but there's been some problems here, so our structure was damaged a little bit, but not so much. But if you look at those Muslims down the beach, well, the local minister of parliament happens to be a Muslim. They were able to get some extra money from the government to build a seawall around their structure, which is why that one was spared." And I can't remember exactly what the Catholic Church excuse was, but maybe I can't remember what it was. But the point is that there's a lot of complexity involved in this. You cannot look at a disaster through the lens of just, in my case, the geophysics of a tsunami. If you have a 10-meter high wave that hits Japan, or hits Sri Lanka, or hits the coast of India, or Indonesia, they're going to have vastly different effects based on the local ecology, sociology, religion, structure. All sorts of things can add into what makes this actually a disaster. To understand these complexities in this increasing complex world, you have to look at education and create leaders that are going to be trained interdisciplinarily. We cannot only look at, a geophysicist working alone is not going to solve problems of how many people die in a tropical cyclone, or how much economic losses there are for that matter. So these increasing complexities, and as things get more and more interconnected with globalization, we need to have a very nimble and savvy population of leaders that can respond to these disasters on a number of different levels. Prior to being at Yale and US College, I spent 15 years at a small liberal arts college in New York called Vassar College, where we had a really great group of students who did a lot of really good interdisciplinary work. And the thing that makes these small liberal arts colleges somewhat unique and somewhat different from larger universities, and why Singapore really felt they need to invest in this model of higher education, was the residential component of the college. All students will be living on campus in this new college model. Right now we have 155 students, as I mentioned before. We're going to ramp that up to 250 in each class. We'll have 1,000 students on campus throughout all 4 years. And throughout all 4 years, all 1,000 students, be them Singaporean or from elsewhere, will be living on campus all 4 years. What this does, it creates a community of learning. People will be having conversations that exist not only in the classroom in seminar formats and officially structured methods, structured formats, but also in the dining halls and late at night. We know that university students across the world don't tend to sleep except in the middle of the day. The conversations that go on in commons rooms in the residence halls last throughout the night. Sometimes they'll be over the latest party, but oftentimes they'll be over Socrates and Plato, or in the case of Yale and US College, what does Socrates have to do with Kung Fu Tzu? So in creating this residential college model, we believe that we do a few things that actually will tie back into elitism, which I want to get to. One thing it does is it creates these conversations that happen outside the classroom, which is really important. But with these conversations also comes a certain amount of connections between people. So people make friends, and hopefully these friends will last a lifetime. I keep looking at my friend Murley back there, and he needed a favor. He calls me up and says, "Hey, Brian, I'm giving this conference in Kerala. Can you come down?" I said, "Of course," because we've worked together before. So these sorts of things, these sort of networks will evolve over time, and I think it'll be a lot tighter if you live and learn in the same community. Another thing that we do at Yale and US College is spend a lot of investment on what they call co-curricular activities. These co-curricular activities are activities that occur outside the classroom, and they're actually sponsored by the college in oftentimes, but they aren't tied to individual classes. So, for example, a weekend comes up back in Singapore, and there was a play at the local theater that was being put on called Trojan Women. At the same time, there's a class going on Greek and classic works from Greece and also China, and a group of students were able to go to this play with a professor who's a classics professor. Outside the class, they went to have drinks after the play and discuss the play in this sort of informal, less formal format. What this does, and having these conversations, not only does it increase the depth of knowledge and actually tie on to the knowledge, what you've learned. If you're reading about Herodotus or the Odyssey and you actually see a play, it actually engraves it better in your brain, and it'll stick a little bit longer. You also have a connection with a professor that many students won't have at a large university. Having to go out for drinks after a play with your professor is something that's going to be commonplace as we evolve with Yale and US College, that is oftentimes very rare in larger universities. Another rather unique aspect of Yale and US College, we actually have a common curriculum. The first year, all students take the exact same 4 classes. These classes include classic works in literature and humanities. We actually blend East and West, so we'll look at reading the classic works of Greece and Rome alongside of China and India. They're reading the Odyssey alongside the Ramayana and looking at the comparisons between these two epic stories. Literature and humanities, philosophy and political thought, comparative social institutions, and scientific inquiry. Because all 155, eventually all 250 students will be taking the exact same 4 classes, the threads of knowledge, every student will know the same thing, and as we have these threads continue throughout the classroom into the residence halls, dining halls, perhaps even the parties on Saturday night, who knows. They'll have these commonalities in common. The other advantage that having this common curriculum offers is because all students are on the same schedule, we're actually able to stop classes in the middle of the semester. Everybody takes off a week in the class and gets to focus on one area of research with the professor. So about anywhere between 8 to 15 students tag along with the professor in their area of research and complete a small project. So examples of this include one thing that I think would be very interesting in this crowd. I was speaking with my colleague Mahesh next to me this morning about the riots that happened in Singapore a few weeks ago amongst some of the Indian, mostly Tamil migrant workers. There's some pretty bad riots, but one of our professors there is actually from Trivandrum. Her research is on migrant labor in Singapore. She took a group of students around to look at different migrant labor issues, took them to the dormitories where the workers work and live, where they live, took them to a hospital or a hospice where injured workers stay when they're not allowed to work anymore, and we're able to investigate this issue of migrant labor in a lot more depth. Second example, I was able to take a group of students to Aceh province in Indonesia to look at post-tsunami reconstruction efforts. We had 18 students that went there, and to see complexity evolved also in this post-conflict area was very interesting. I mentioned these two projects again because what happens here, and something that cannot happen in a MOOC unless you're pretty clever about how to do it, is that experiential learning where students are actually out there in the field. They actually got to go to a mosque that survived the tsunami and stand on top of it and look around and see that everything in this area would have been destroyed in 2004 and how it's been rebuilt since. That is imbued a lot more when you're actually out there in the field talking to people in the coffee houses of Aceh than if you're reading about it in a book or looking at it on a screen. I bring this back also to this idea of elite education. One thing that we're trying to do here in building this community of learning in Asia for the world is to create these bonds that will last for a lifetime. As our students go out and hopefully make money along the way in different types of investments and whatnot, ideally they'll reinvest in the college. Creating endowments for colleges is one of the big business areas in universities these days, especially in the United States. And you can look at it from a very cynical place, saying, yes, they're just trying to build up endowments to have all sorts of things. But one thing this endowment does, and we're really trying to build up our endowment at Yale and US for, is for financial aid. At the big institutions where we have these rather elite institutions, they tend to be, have upwards of 50 to 70% of the students are on some form of financial aid. So as you move forward, consider what that model would look like. I mean, think in Kerala here, there's some rather sophisticated ways of looking at how financial aid might work. Consider that as you do, so you can actually increase the diversity of people in the community. We had students from, frankly, we had Chinese students in Singapore who come from very elite families who got to go and talk to the migrant workers. They had no idea exactly what the issues were for the migrant laborers. If we want to change the society and change justice issues in the society, this is the way to do it, to keep these conversations going between different classes of people, between different races and ethnicities, different nationalities. I think that's what's really going to change the world. I'm going to stop talking here. I don't want to talk too long, and perhaps we can continue our conversation as we go on. This is not really an experiment. This is really tried and true educational models. We've been doing liberal arts education in the United States at Yale for 350 years, which is not long by Indian standards, but is quite long by US standards. In doing this, this model's been proven, it works, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. I think as you'll watch the evolution of Yale and US go on for the next however many years, will prove that this model will be extremely effective in Asia also. So I'll stop there and pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you.
This morning at 4 a.m., so please excuse me if I start dozing off towards the end. But again, I think I'm very happy to be here at probably what is the first conference of the new year, first international conference of the new year. And I think I missed most of it like Brian. But also like Brian, I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, Murali, for getting me here. He's the one who's been pushing me always to come here and to be involved, and I'm very grateful to be here. This morning I wanted to brief you a little bit on some broader issues, before we get into the topic of this conference on higher education. The broader issues being on sustainability, the policy linkages, so on and so forth. And then I think in terms of how Kerala could get involved in terms of what we're doing through this global universities partnership on environment and sustainability. So firstly, in terms of broadly speaking and the bigger picture, as you know, within the UN system, and we have a lot of these discussions with all the leaders, sometimes it's more of a talk fest, yes, it's a bit of a challenge. but at the same time to bring the countries together, to engage them and to look at the future, because things have changed. We're no longer in the same industrial revolution style situation where we're looking at knowledge, we're looking at new systems of governance, so on and so forth. So with this, we had this Rio Plus 20 summit. I don't know if some of you have heard about this summit in Brazil. It had the largest number of political leaders, heads of state. I think we had 190 plus countries, 50,000 people in Rio in June 2012. And after a lot of difficult issues, they adopted what is called the Future We Want. And this Future We Want document is like a blueprint in terms of our future direction. Of course, a lot of things were highlighted in this, and in terms of environmental challenges, climate change being, I guess, one of the more topical issues. Yeah, and I think next year is the critical thing for climate change in terms of arriving at an agreement. Besides that, there was something called the green economy, because often our form of development, this GDP measure that we have, is perhaps irrelevant in the way that we are developing in terms of the future, where we're looking at our natural capital, our human capital in terms of education, in addition to the economic and financial capital. So a lot of interesting discussion along those lines. But then in terms of how do we manage with the little natural resources we have and this population that is now crossed 7 billion, on track for 9 billion, and the same one planet we have to service their needs. Yeah? So a lot of interesting discussions, and now within the UN system, yes, the political and security issues in Syria, etc., have taken center stage. But at the same time, at the General Assembly in September this year, another key aspect as a follow-up to this Rio Plus 20 discussions looked at what is called the Sustainable Development Goals. Because I think you've heard of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. Education is positioned. So within that context, the SDGs are being negotiated for the first time. We've had open working groups. We had the leaders, I think from the UK, David Cameron, from Indonesia, Bambang Yudhoyono, and then from Liberia, the president. The three of them have issued a high-level report. And of the General Assembly discussions this year, the focus was on SDGs. And not that it would apply only to developing countries, as was the case with the MDGs. It would be universally applicable to all countries across the globe, and in terms of having these targets, aspirational it may be, but to focus our development trajectory. Yeah? So I wanted to put that before you so that you have some idea, and then linked to all this is this whole UN Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. And this has been going on 2005 onwards, and UNESCO, our UN sister agency, is taking the lead in coordinating this. But then in trying to focus our education to move more towards sustainable development, and looking at our current educational model to see if this can be sort of refocused through a sustainable development lens. Yeah, so this was slightly the global overview, but in this context within UNEP, and this is our UN Environment Program, we've put together a global universities partnership on environment and sustainability. Our estimate is that there are 16,000 universities globally, and about 200 million going through as students at the higher education level every year. And this is the International Association of Universities based in Paris doing some research. Again, it's very difficult to put a number as to the actual number of universities. But out of 16,000, we've tapped, and we have a small core group looking more at the developing regions of about 400 universities that are currently members of this Global Universities Partnership on Environment Sustainability. We are looking at 3 pillars, and again, trying to promote that transnational education angle. where under the first education pillar, trying to come up with curriculum, for example, on green economy. Very few universities have been looking at this in terms of the future. And also in terms of with Yale on RED Plus, this is reduced emissions. We've just put out a source book with our colleagues in the CNRD network. We're working on this Eco DRR, and I'm very excited. We might have our first MOOC this year for us in UNEP, if all goes well. Yeah. And then in terms of training, the second pillar, and using universities as hubs, not just to train our future leaders, but the current leaders, our policymakers, yeah, to put the knowledge to them for their decision making. And here, thanks to Murali with the Institute for Management in Government, which train about 25,000 civil servants, we have entered into an agreement where we're trying to mainstream sustainability thinking right from junior level to senior level policymakers. We have good programs in Germany, in Dresden University that have been going on 35 years plus, but again, looking at trying to strengthen that. The third one is more on networking. And here, the South-South networks, I think, we need to promote learning across, and not just North-South, but we add to the North-South, but also South-South. We've had very good institutions in China and India, and trying to promote that dialogue. And from where I am based in Africa, there's a very strong urge to learn from all